Something about Sonic 3 left me disappointed, and I'm going to explain why. My goal with this video is not to say that the movie is bad, which it isn't, but to offer a more in-depth analysis. If you absolutely love this movie and don't want to hear any criticism, please don't watch this video. You are free to disagree with me, but if you want to watch it, know that in this video I will try to be as clear as possible and analyze it objectively. I will offer an in-depth study of the more technical parts as well as the emotional aspects of the story. Now, let's start from the beginning. We can say that some aspects of the movie have improved a lot when compared to the previous ones. The CGI, the visual effects, the addition of soundtracks like Live and Learn, lots of reference to the games, super forms, Knuckles and Tails, and also the surprise return of Jim Carrey. Before explaining the movie itself, it's necessary to cover a few separate topics. To understand it better, we need to talk about comedy. Comedy is the most difficult type of movie to write about. There are many ways of doing humor, and usually each person has their own personal preferences for a specific type of humor, and this involves a number of key elements, including the changed nature of society and the difference between generations. Comedy is also something intrinsic to the way we see the world and the vision we develop over time. So it's normal for a person from one generation to enjoy a specific type of comedy more than other generations. Unlike comedy, dramas are universal. Scenes of sorrow have an effect on an audience that, regardless of country, generation, or social context, will understand and empathize with the tragedies presented. However, comedy doesn't have the same effect objectively. Jokes are usually reduced to social context, culture, and familiarity with the elements presented. Therefore, producing comedy films that appeal to a universe audience is actually much more complex than a movie in the drama or adventure category. And this shows how Jim Carrey's performance is good enough to please many people around the world. And why is this relevant to this analysis? Comedy films are naturally fated to time and culture, and this is a limiting factor for general public appreciation. Comedy films for 12 years ago don't have the same appeal for today. Another determining factor that damaged comedy is translation into different language. A joke that works in one language won't work in another. From this, we can understand why Sonic didn't have the same impact in Japan as it did in the rest of the world. You might be thinking, but that doesn't matter, the movie is a hit. You shouldn't judge the impact of the movie based only on the approval of a single country. And that's true, I agree with you, but it's undeniable that comedy, when overused, hurts the movie's performance in the long term. Don't get me wrong, you might like all the jokes in this movie, but know that objectively comedy is relative, and that's a fact, not an opinion. What's wrong with comedy itself, you might be wondering. The big problem is that not only does the comedy itself limit the movie's ability to please, but also having too much focus on comedy, especially in a movie that should be a little more dramatic and emotionally profound, ends up cutting out some of that impact. In both trailers and some TV spots released before the movie, you can see that they were trying to convey a dramatic image of the movie, which would be something more developed than the last movies, even though it was targeted at children's audience. Despite what is presented in trailers, the scenes that make a real impact are so brief and scattered throughout the plot that they don't provide the emotional depth they should. One of the main aspects that also contributed to this result was the length of the movie. I can't understand why they decided to shorten it so much compared to the previous one. But despite this crucial factor, I was expecting something deeper by the standards of the very universe that was established in the previous movies. Not only did they drastically overshadow Maria and Jared's past, but they turned it into something superficial that doesn't carry all the emotional weight that the real story of SA2 is trying to convey. I'm not complaining about the changes themselves. because I believe that, for example, Shadow falling to Earth in a meteor is also interesting, fits into the context of the movie, and could be used as a bridge to introduce Black Doom or the Black Arms, although I know that this possibility is minimal. The problem itself is that nothing is really explained or justified. Everything happens for the sake of convenience, for the sake of advancing the story itself. As a writer, I was really shocked by the numerous basic flaws that this movie has. I will soon explain in detail what they are and why they matter in the long term. If the producers have been careful enough, they could have cut out several unnecessary scenes so there was more screen time to answer the questions raised by the movie itself. To give depth to the narrative, if creative liberties are taken, it is necessary to introduce something that fits in and develops well each of these new aspects that have been demonstrated. But this is a point that was completely ignored in this film. No, I'm not complaining about this scene here. It is very good and extremely well executed and doesn't interfere with the overall plot. I'm talking about the context in which it was used. If we had a separate spin-off series just to focus on Eggman's story, it would make a lot more sense and fit in better. If, on the other hand, the gaps in the story have been filled in, the overall comedy won't have damaged the movie. The length of the movie, which in itself is too short to explain a story like SA2, is wasted on things that are not so relevant to the developments of the plot. And I can confirm that the screen time reserved for explaining Shadow, Gerald and Maria's past is nearly 8 minutes. In a movie of this length, devoting only 8 minutes to explain their story is frankly a disappointment. The main problem with the second movie, and also with the Knuckles series, is the exaggerated focus on human characters, which takes the spotlight away from the main characters and consumes screen time that could be used to better explore the plot and give depth to this universe. The excessive focus on Eggman and Gerald goes directly against this expectation. Although Jim Carrey's performances are brilliant, they become distressing because the feeling is that the main character in the movie after Sonic is being sidelined to make a way for those who should be supporting characters. Also, the movie doesn't allow the information to stick in the viewer's mind and already jumps to the next joke, diluting all the inherent impacts of Shadow's past. And even within the universe itself, in the last movie released, there's a space for dramatic scenes to breathe. During the fight between Sonic and Knuckles, where the past is remembered, there is no immediate break in the humor during this phase. The comedy scenes are only introduced several minutes into the movie, after Sonic escaped from the avalanche. The length of a movie cannot be used as an excuse for poor development, and I will prove why. Let's take a look at an example. The fan film Project Shadow, in around 27 minutes, managed to introduce us to almost everything we need to know about Shadow, his powers, Gerald and Maria, the government, and the relationship with Gunn. Anyone unfamiliar with the stories in the games will be able to understand the character's true story in depth after watching it. If you're thinking about Space Colony Arc, BioLizard, Rouge, Amy, or any of those elements from the games, throw those ideas away. I'm not trying to say that the changes in the story in the original movie are bad and the fan film is better simply because it strictly follows the games. What I'm trying to show is that the changes the movie makes to Shadow's story are not properly explored. In a movie of 1 hour and 40 minutes, it would be fair to devote less than a third of that time to better development Shadow's story. In 27 minutes, Project Shadow explained everything we need to know. How could they not devote an approximate amount of time to his story? 8 minutes to explain Shadow's entire story is disappointing. They could simply have made the movie longer, perhaps more than 2 hours, to give enough time to develop the story in a satisfying way. And please don't tell me that in the future they're going to release a spin-off series focused only on Shadow. Even if that were to happen, it's unprofessional to produce a movie about the character, have him barely explored, and then use an excuse like that to justify yourself. Okay, now that I've demonstrated some of the initial problems, let's analyze the story in more technical terms. The errors I'm going to point out here may seem irrelevant to some, but I believe it's necessary because even if they are minor problems, they still affect the experience of the movie and should be taken into account. So if you don't want to waste your time and skip to where I analyze the emotional part itself, skip ahead to emotional depth. The pace at the beginning of the movie is faster than the speed of Sonic himself. About 15 minutes in, Shadow's wake up, beats up all the guards and escapes from prison. We have Sonic, Tails and Knuckles having a race, then it switches to the surprise that would be Sonic's birthday on Earth, his interaction with his family, Toad's explanation. Night comes, Guns appears and recruits them. They appear in Tokyo, find Shadow and fight him. Sonic confronts Shadow and gets beaten up. The city suffers a blackout. Shadow escapes and they decided to regroup in the Chow Garden. All this is presented to us at once, leaving no room for the scenes to breathe or for greater immersion. Compare it to the last movie. The first 5 minutes focus exclusively on explaining how Eggman is spending his days in the mushroom world. We then see Sonic running around the city and trying to stop the thieves. Soon after, he returns to Green Hills and meets up with Toad for a chat. Here, you can see the disparity between one movie and the other, where in the second movie the pace is steady but not overly fast. In the first 15 minutes of the second movie, we have very little information to absorb. Robotnik's return, Sonic's attempt at heroism, and his conversation with Toad. Just those three main elements, narratively, including several elements at once, damage our ability to absorb ideas and understand information. Our brains are limited to one amount of information at a time, and this must be taken into account when it comes to content such as films, books, and story in general. For the movie to generate greater immersion, it is crucial that it has an appropriate pace of development. If you analyze, even in action films, the fighting have a scene or two of greater impact. The beginning is reserved only for introducing the narrative, even in films that are directly sequels. Take Avengers Endgame, and you'll notice that initial focus of the film is to show Thanos walking quietly and to establish a reflective aura, to demonstrate the consequences of the last war and the state in which the world finds itself today. Something similar can be said about Sonic 2, where the initial introduction is given to Eggman in the mushroom world and how Sonic is spending his days on Earth. The first scenes with the greatest degree of impact on the movie, narratively speaking, began after more than 20 minutes. Even though Sonic appears running and trying to stop thieves in the first few minutes of the movie, these scenes don't carry the same weight as Knuckles' appearance and the first fight between them. The beginning of Sonic 3, on the other hand, it's so different in this regard that it made me wonder if it really is the same writers as the last movies. The transitions are very abrupt when comparing the two films. Even if the fast pace is reasonably corrected over the course of the movie, the rushed introduction hurts the impact of the later scenes and the construction of the story. The movie's dialogue in many scenes are unnatural and seems to be cut in several parts to reduce the time of the movie. When Sonic asks Commander Walters who Shadow is, he immediately replies,
"Who was that guy?"
Shadow's story began a lot like yours, Sonic. But where you found family and friends on this planet, Shadow found only pain and loss.
This feels off. During the trailer, you believe that this sentence is introduced after long dialogue, but in the movie, it's thrown directly in the viewer's face. And in other scene, when Sonic is talking with Tails and Knuckles, he immediately stops the conversation to tell Rockwell the Sonic Adventure line, even though she didn't ask him anything. Another part where this is evident is after the fight between Sonic and Shadow. Shadow starts talking about Maria immediately after Sonic's give up, which gives the scene no time to breathe. Another serious problem with this film, apart from the fast pace at the beginning, is the continuity and location mistakes. Although the producer established from the outset that the movie would take place between Tokyo and London, the logic behind this location is not taken into consideration. Notice how the movie begins with Tokyo at night during Shadow's awakening, and then we are introduced to Green Hill during the day, which is correct. But soon after the first scenes, we see how night comes and we get a sense of how many hours have passed. As confirmed in the first movie, Green Hills is located in Montana, USA. So if it's dark in Green Hills, in Tokyo, we should see the city in daylight because the time difference is huge. But the scenes in Tokyo take place at night without thinking about this basic inconsistency between the two cities. You think that's irrelevant? Okay, then let's look at something worse. This is something I noticed the very first time I watched the movie, and I'm surprised no one else has mentioned it. In the first movie, we see how at the end, Sonic is adopted by the Wachowski and receives a room in their house. During this scene, we noticed how Sonic's things have been taken from the cave where he used to live, which implies subjectively that either Tom or Maddie had found the cave and carefully placed Sonic's things in his new home. But in this third film, this is completely ignored, not only by showing how things still remain there, but with Tom stating through dialogue that he never visited Sonic's cave before. If the goal was to show that drawing Sonic makes on the cave wall, they could have simply shown the cave empty and introduced dialogue that didn't imply that Tom had never been there before. Another important point about this mistake is that, as well as being a continuity error, it becomes unnatural. If Tom had never visited Sonic's cave before, and this place is hiding within the vast forest of Green Hills, how they are able to set up camp so close to this cave? It's very convenient, and it doesn't sound natural. You might think, oh, but this is a children's movie. It doesn't need to follow logic as well as SpongeBob lighting a fire underwater. Okay, fair enough. But if you think that in the last two movies we didn't have this kind of problem, it sounds strange, to say the least. The problem is that it doesn't stop here. In Sonic 2, we see how Sonic, in super form, released the 7 Chaos Emeralds, and we witness them going far away, as if they were being scattered around the world. And not only that, we see Knuckles fixing the Master Emerald, meaning that somehow, although at the beginning of the movie these two elements were unified, this would now be corrected so that they would once again be separate entities, just as they are in the games. But this fact is completely ignored in the third movie, which shows us the 7 Chaos Emeralds and the Master Emerald being unified again. Another scene that was completely ignored in the sequel is Shadow's own awakening. In the post-credit scenes of the second movie, we see Shadow emerge from a capsule on the ground, where he is trapped and frozen. In this scene, which is very similar to SA2, due to the fact that the capsule rises from the ground, it is also possible to notice that in this apparent laboratory where Shadow is, there's no one. It is an empty place. Also, during the dialogue between Commander Walters and this gun agent, it is confirmed that the gun itself did not know about Shadow's existence. When they say that they have discovered a top-secret file that has been lost for over 50 years. But not only that, it is stated that someone has worked hard to keep those documents secret. But in the third movie, this is changed to Shadow being watched by several guards on the prison island. This goes against not only the information in the second movie, but also the dialogue in Sonic 3 itself, where Commander Walters states that few people knew of Shadow's existence. This information cannot be true, considering there has literally been an entire army watching Shadow day and night for years. And we can't ignore the fact that in the second movie, Commander Walters explained that gun was created after Sonic's incident in San Francisco, but then goes on the stage that it existed over 50 years ago. A simple change that could be made to correct this error would be to state that gun already existed but had a different name, or that it was a different organization, or that it was reactivated after years. But these details are just a warm-up. They are more important aspects to be analyzed. Something important to note is that Sonic in this movie tries to act more independently, as if he has problems working as a team, which goes against what was already established in Sonic 2. In the last movie, Sonic is the first to invite Tails to join him, and he's also the first to suggest that Knuckles and Tails work by his side to defeat Eggman. He becomes the leader of the team and also assumes the position of distracting Eggman in order to give Tails and Knuckles the chance to invade the robot and take him by surprise, which only proves how much Sonic can trust his new friends. He believes in them to the point of risking his own life. However, in the third movie, Sonic ignores his friends not only in the first fight against Shadow, but also during the invasion of Gun, and also after Tone is injured. And at the end, the movie tries to convey the image that Sonic has learned to work as a team, even though this was already done in the last movie. How did Eggman manage to survive? I don't think it would be necessary to give a very complex or extensive explanation of how he survived, since his unbelievable ability to survive several situations is part of the character's magic. However, it is evident that in Sonic 2 his return has a much greater influence on the narrative. To show how he survived may not be very important, but at no point does the movie show us what the process was like for him to become depressed. To demonstrate a little of what I mean, think back to the last movie. Eggman has been exiled from Earth to an isolated planet where there are only mushrooms and a breathable atmosphere. The chances of him going mad were much more higher than any other scenario, and the movie itself plays on this fact, showing him talking to a rock, referring to another famous movie. But not only does he manage to survive, he also makes a spectacular comeback with the help of Knuckles. It's still strange that he gave up trying to finish off his greatest enemy after only trying twice and showing such determination in the last movie. We could think of a possible reason why Eggman gave up trying to beat Sonic apart from the shame he suffered in the last movie. And the answer is the Master Emerald. Eggman has witnessed the Emerald's frightening power firsthand, and not only has he seen how powerful Sonic has become, but because he has used the Emerald himself, he knows the feeling of possessing so much power. So imagine that power in the hands of the enemy. Sounds scary, doesn't it? But the big problem doesn't lie in the fact that Eggman is depressed, because even if we use this conclusion to explain why he is in this state, there are still two other main problems with this development. Eggman is having an existential crisis at the start of the movie, and despite all this apparent depression, they just show him some image of his technology being stolen, and that's it? Does he recover immediately? In the trailers, from the way the dialogue and scenes are set, the impression was that Eggman was only helping Sonic to save the world, probably in a self-centered attempt to save himself, because if the planet no longer exists, it would be the destruction of himself, which in fact could be a satisfactory enough reason for him to agree to help Sonic in the first place. Another important thing is the fact that Eggman himself has completely forgotten about the existence of the Master Emerald. Even though he has allied himself with his grandfather and has the Eclipse Cannon in his hands, he should know that Sonic and the others have the Master Emerald. During the scene in which Sonic, Tails, and Knuckles are trapped, Jared established how the Eclipse Cannon was an extremely powerful weapon. Right after that, Sonic says that firing such a weapon would cause the death of thousands of innocent people. If it has already been established that the weapon is powerful enough to destroy entire cities, why does Sonic still resist using the Master Emerald? Protecting the planet should be the absolute priority, and he clearly couldn't convince either Gerald or Eggman to change their minds about using this weapon. The script chooses not to use the Master Emeralds as not to interfere with the development of the film, which may seem justifiable to some. However, there were much more intelligent and complex solutions that would have helped give more depth to the narrative. Consider the following scenario. As established in the last movie, the Chaos Emeralds had spread across the planet, and now the Master Emerald is a separate entity. This would mean that there is no immediate possibility of using them, so the conscious decision not to use them when they are accessible would not seem forced. You could argue that keeping the emeralds scattered would be a bad decision because the movie wouldn't have time for the characters to go on a search for them during the plot. And you're right about it. But there are other solutions, and here's my idea. They could have briefly introduced at the beginning of the movie, following on from the previous movie, the idea that Echidna tribe had a special connection with the emerald, and that's why Knuckles would not only be its guardian, but also say through the dialogue that the emeralds hide secrets and mysteries that no one knows about, and establishing an idea that the emerald have a kind of consciousness of their own, and that only those who are chosen can use the power of the emerald to its full potential. And could also be established that the Master Emerald, separate from the 7 Chaos Emeralds, has no power, only a sense of connection with them. In this way, not only would the initial problem of both being unified and now being separate things would be corrected, but also that the Master Emerald itself could not be used to obtain power, which would give the notion that despite having the emerald in hand, it would not have the practical use. Later, when we receive the information that the Eclipse Cannon offers a risk to all humanity, the characters would wish to gather the 7 Chaos Emeralds, but soon afterwards, it would be established that there wouldn't be enough time or effective way of locating them. This led them to make the decision not to search for the emeralds, but to believe with hope that they would be able to stop the 2 Robotniks without them. And after first establishing the mystery of the emeralds, this would be the foundation for the solution of not having the emeralds in hand. Once the story reached a point of no return, where the power of the emeralds was the only solution, they could have introduced that the Master Emerald recognizes the pure heart of Sonic, and with that, she sends out a call that summons all the 7 Chaos Emeralds, bring them directly to him, without the need for them to have searched for it during the movie. This scene could take place after Sonic gives up on revenge and decides not to kill Shadow, acknowledging his pain but remaining firm in following his heart. And the fight between him and Shadow would happen in base form, and the super form would only be used for positive purpose, to save the world, increasing the value of the transformation itself. This would be just one of the scenarios, among others, that could be used to correct the poor use of the Master Emerald and the 7 Chaos Emeralds. Now let's look at other aspects of the script. The drones that were set to the Chow Garden are controlled by Gerald, meaning that Eggman initially had no involvement. So when Tails mentioned Shadow's escape, how did Stone know who they are talking about? How would he know Shadow's name and that he's a superpower hedgehog? Now speaking about Gerald, if he's been in a top-secret prison for over 50 years, totally isolated from the rest of the world, and Eggman apparently isn't much older than that, how did he know that his grandson had become a great scientist like him and built drones for him to steal? And worse, how did he know Eggman was alive when not even Gun itself knew this information? And if Gun had erased Eggman from the database as stated in the last movie, as well as probably destroying all this technology, where did Gerald get Eggman's drones? Gerald was locked up in prison. How would he know about Sonic's existence? In the scene where Sonic and Eggman arrive at the abandoned gun base, Gerald says, "These are the guests I've been expecting." But how did he know that Eggman and Sonic would form an alliance and go there together? Another important question, at what point in the story did Gun manage to create the Eclipse Cannon? If Gerald designed this weapon, there should be some explanation. If we didn't have something like the Black Arms, why was this weapon created? Was the government creating a weapon of mass destruction for no purpose? They could answer that with a phrase like, it was created to combat alien attacks. But we didn't get that kind of answer. And speaking of Walters, he has an extremely empty and meaningless supposed death, so bizarre that it's comical for a scene like that to be portrayed in such a trivial way. Was that supposed to be dramatic? We don't even have an answer as if he's alive or not after that. Another question. How did Shadow know that the man standing in front of him was Commander Walters when the last time he saw him was 50 years ago, when he was still young? He wasn't even wearing a name tag on his uniform. Another thing to mention is the new character introduced in this movie. Rockwell is one of the most pointless characters in the whole movie. She has no motivation, no explanation of where she came from or who she is. Nothing is revealed about her, apart from her name and her position. And for much of the movie's plot, a point of view is forced on her that she is a villain or has some more important role. And in the end, Rockwell disappears in the same way she appeared, without adding anything relevant, and still consuming a lot of screen time. Tone in this movie has been severely toned down. No, I'm not saying that he should have more screen time, because in my opinion, human characters shouldn't appear too much. What I mean is that he has become more passive as a character. In the first movies, he appears as someone who is very active and willing to help others. But in this movie, we see Tom's performance and courage being inferior to Maddie's. In the last movie, even in the presence of agents with guns, Tom tries to protect Sonic and doesn't let himself be intimidated. But here, he's lost and doesn't know what to do during the raid on gun headquarters. All the tension built up between Sonic and Knuckles' dispute over the Master Emerald fades away as soon as it is revealed that the most powerful artifact in this universe is being used as a joke by Wade Whipple. I really don't understand this movie's desire to ridicule all the most important aspects of this franchise. I'm not complaining about the comedy, because after all, in the last two movies, we didn't have this kind of problem, and it was still funny. Another absurd flaw is, how did Sonic know Maria's name when it wasn't said in front of him? Even if someone creates a mental theory that when Sonic saw her photo, he saw her name somewhere, but how would he know that it was her name and not someone else's? The way they dealt with Shadow's past was frustrating. They left several aspects unresolved, which leaves you with more questions than answers. Maria in this movie isn't sick, then why allow a child on a top-secret military base? In the game, the only reason she was aboard the Ark was because she was sick, and Gerald had made a deal with the government to allow her to stay there. Another important information that wasn't even mentioned. Who ordered Shadow to be arrested and why? Why would they be running out of there in an emergency? Why were soldiers trying to shoot them? Shadow appears in every scene, doing various tests with the scientists, being very patient and apparently doing everything the scientists ordered him to do. So why were they being chased in the first place? Why did they suddenly decide to take him prisoner? The only information we have is Jared's words. They want to take Shadow away from us, Maria, but doesn't explain why. They haven't given any context, and the idea would be to show some scene in which the government is afraid of Shadow's powers, or to show that Shadow has caused some damage even if unintentionally. But none of this happens. At no point does the movie tell you why they would want to arrest him. Another thing that doesn't make sense is Maria being the only one to die, considering that Shadow was right next to her. The way Shadow is captured is simply pathetic. They treat him like a street cat. They throw the ultimate life form into the cell with a simple shock baton? Excuse me? During the first movie, Sonic in his moments of sadness causes an energy surge that devastates part of the country. How could Shadow experience one of the greatest traumas of his life, not explode completely? He should have gone into a rampage and tried to destroy everything around him, just as we seen in the scene where he charges the energy for the Eclipse Cannon. If they had saved that hatred for the scene where Marias dies, it would make a lot more sense. They could have shown that the guards were only able to stop him with the help of an entire army and using chaotic energy weapons that were designed based on Shadow's own energy, so his capture would have made total sense. Emeralds transformed thoughts into power, so why did Sonic fall into space instead of Shadow? In the game, this is explained to us by a few factors. One of it is that Shadow wasn't used to the super form in the same way as Sonic, the Lost of the Rings, and another factor, which is more conceptual, is that Shadow's last thoughts were of Maria, and this was his driving force to maintain the super form. And as soon as he fulfills his promise to Maria, he falls into space precisely because he can't maintain this state. But in this movie, we have none of that to back up this decision. Did Sonic fall because he was tired? Did he get discouraged? Did he give up fighting? It is not possible to say for sure if he fell because he took more damage from the Eclipse Cannon, because Shadow is right next to him, which would technically make him take the same amount of damage as Sonic if they wanted to eliminate Sonic from the scene so that Shadow could sacrifice himself. They could have made Shadow throw Sonic away somehow, and they would have achieved the same result, which was to remove Sonic from the scene, and would have made sense. With that, I think I covered the technical issues. Now, let's look at the emotional aspects of the story. Sonic movies are known for using a mixture of the three-act structure and the hero's journey, which in itself isn't a bad thing. But when we put SA2 story into perspective, it's written using the shotenketsu, a narrative style that by its very nature is very different from what we've seen in yester stories. What does it matter, you wonder? The difference is mainly due to the initial purpose. The main focus of SA2's story is not about revenge, but on a sequence of tragic events and their consequences. Jared and Shadow's story is a tragedy that could have been avoided. The game invites us to see the characters from various perspectives, understanding their emotions and decisions. The point of reflection that game offers is how actions motivated by pain and despair can lead to wrong choices, but also how redemption is possible, even after great tragedies. The game presents a world where the actions of individuals are deeply influenced by their emotions. The narrative leads us to question what good and evil really are, showing that often character decisions, even the most destructive ones, came from internal struggles and intense emotions, which makes their action much more tragic and human than simply villainy. Gunn's decision to eliminate the project and treat Gerald like a criminal can be seen as one of the main factors behind the tragedy. Gerald and Maria are, in a way, victims of the decisions of this organization which, without understanding the situation, resorts to violence and destruction as a way of solving a problem. The tragedy of SA2 can also be seen as a critique of the use of power without compassion and a human greed. The film's narrative falls at its core when it tries to turn Gerald into the real villain, showing a simplified image of the character. The film tries to convey the idea that the story is about revenge, and seeks to correct this through Sonic, who shows that despite going through suffering similar to Shadow's, he decides not to take revenge. Revenge, in many stories and in real life, it's not cured by external circumstances or by simply observing that others have also suffered and not taken revenge. The true cure for revenge lies in the search for forgiveness and inner peace. This understanding goes far beyond an external solution and connects with the individual's emotional and spiritual growth. Forgiveness is the real cure to revenge, because it breaks the cycle of hatred and bitterness. When a person chooses to forgive, they are not saying that what happened was right or justifying the wrong that was done. Forgiveness is an act of personal freedom in which the individual decides to no longer be defined by the pain or anger caused by the other person. This is presented to us mainly in later stories, such as the game Shadow the Hedgehog, where the character says,
"Only one thing left to do. To put the past behind me."
And also in Sonic 06,
You forgive humanity this folly, then?
I determine my own destiny.
Many people say that this movie was made this way because it's a children's movie, but I disagree. But to be fair, let's compare this movie with another children's movie, and for that, we need to talk about Big Hero 6. Big Hero 6 is a movie produced by Disney and released in 2014. The story follows Hiro Hamada, a young robotics prodigy who, after the death of his older brother Tadashi, finds himself lost and struggling emotionally. The movie touches on themes such as friendship, overcoming grief, and the value of working as a team. Throughout the plot, Hiro learns to deal with the loss of his brother and to use his abilities in a responsible way. The film emphasizes the accidents in which Tadashi dies, show his funeral, people going to offer condolences, among others various silent scenes that allow viewers to process this loss. Hiro sees his brother as the central figure in his life. After losing both his parents and living with his aunt, he goes through several moments of uncertainty and anxiety on his journey. But despite everything, Tadashi is always there for him, believing in him even when he doesn't believe in himself. And just when Hiro is starting to get his life on the right track, he loses his brother, his greatest example and beacon of hope. This leaves him completely devastated. Despite being a children's movie, the film not only shows Hiro deeply sad and alone, but also his attempts to deny his pain and distance himself from any memory of Tadashi, his anger and inability to accept what has happened. Several elements are gradually placed in this movie that represents the character's pain, such as seeing him spend days without going to school, refusing to eat, stay in a dark room, and giving up his goals. Baymax, the robot created by his brother, ends up playing a central role in Hiro's grieving process. Baymax not only helps Hiro with his physical wounds, but in a more symbolic way also becomes an emotional support. He begins to help Hiro deal with his pain, trying to guide him in a practical and emotional way, although without fully understanding human feelings. One of the elements that most resembles Sonic 3 is when Hiro realizes that Tadashi's sacrifice was in vain, when he discovers that the professor at his university was still alive because he had used the technology that Hiro himself had developed to protect himself from the fire. Hiro is shocked by the reality that, in his mind, not only has Tadashi's sacrifice in vain, but the professor didn't care one bit about his brother's death. And at that moment, we see how Hiro decides to take revenge by programming Baymax to destroy Callahan. Hiro comes very close to achieving this goal, only to be stopped by the help of his friends, who manage to change Baymax chips before a major tragedy happens. But the climax of the story is when Hiro breaks away from his team and decides to seek revenge on his own. And at this moment, we witness this scene.
Tadashi's gone.
Tadashi is here.
No, he's not here.
Tadashi is here.
This is Tadashi Hamada. And this is the first test of my robotics project.
Hello, I am Baymax.
Stop! The seventh test of my robotics project.
Hello, I am Baymax.
Wait, stop, Scan, stop! Tadashi Hamada again, and this is the 33rd test of my robotics project. I'm not giving up on you. You don't understand this yet, but people need you. So let's get back to work. This is Tadashi Hamada, and this is the 84th test. What do you say, big guy?
Hello, I am Baymax, your personal healthcare companion.
It works. It works! Oh, this is amazing! You work! I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! I knew it! You work! I can't believe it! I can't... Okay. All right, big moment here. Scan me.
Your neurotransmitter levels are elevated. This indicates that you are happy.
I am! I really am! Oh, man. Wait till my brother sees you. You're gonna help so many people, buddy. So many. That's all for now. I am satisfied with my care.
The role narrative is developed in a careful way, dealing with the theme of grief without falling into something that would be too dark for children. The way Sonic 3 deals with grief is, narratively speaking, poor and superficial. The film puts too much emphasis on comedy and forgets to develop all those important aspects and nuance in the emotional construction of the plot. The light shines even when the star's gone is a very good phrase. The message is good, but it's not connected to the earth itself, nor does it mean something that Shadow can use to actually grow. Here, there has no promise. The feeling is that his home is more connected to Maria herself, as if being with her is being at home, which in a way is true, but it doesn't help when it comes to determine why he should have saved people. The conversation between Sonic and Shadow only emphasizes how pointless seeking revenge is, and that Maria's love is more important, but it doesn't connect to the planet or the goal of protecting people. Unlike Knuckles, Shadow had no purpose or goal. He is described as a lost child. In the plot of the second movie, Knuckles is the son of the leader of the Echidna tribe. He was trained in combat and spent a lot of time with his tribe and his father, but he lost them at a young age, just like Sonic. At this point, Knuckles has a very strong moral compass on his side. He already has a sense of honor and justice, and we can clearly see this in the course of the movie, where on several occasions he questions Eggman's attitudes, even though he still follows him. Initially, he becomes Sonic's enemy mainly because he was tricked by Eggman and had the belief that fulfilling his ancestors' wish to possess the Master Emerald would be his mission. Shadow, on the other hand, has a devastating hatred, unbearable pain, and is going through a deep grieving process that he can't get out of on his own. He had no moral basis or intellectual preparation like Knuckles, so convincing him to ally himself with the good side should have been much more difficult, and especially well worked out over the course of the movie, especially as he is constantly being influenced by Jared and Eggman, who are villains and have no trace of integrity. The movie isn't bad for being different from the games, but it needs to justify these changes, but we didn't have that. Another important point is that they split up Shadow's past, and this dilutes his impact a lot. The flashbacks are sometimes so distant from each other, and between them, there are so many jokes and goofiness that you completely forget how deep and dramatic Shadow's past is. It's just take you out of the movie. Jared represents almost nothing to Shadow in this movie, and at no point in the entire movie do we see Jared show any affection towards Shadow. When Commander Walters mentions that the scientists who discovered Shadow believe he could change the world, you can see that Jared's goal is ambiguous, and even tends to be explanatory in reality. Since we don't see this more caring side of Jared, we can still conclude that he just wanted to use Shadow's power, just as he did in the most of the movie. And when he finds out that Shadow has betrayed him, he doesn't feel moved at all. The only sentence of Gerald that shows the slightest concern for Shadow is when he says, "They're trying to take Shadow away from us, Maria." And even then, in that sentence, you can't conclude that there's a deep connection between them. So we don't see an emotional connection between Shadow and Gerald. They just share a desire for revenge and nothing more. The Gerald portrayed in the movie has no emotional depth, and when you think that what happened with Maria was almost an accident, it makes it even worse. He's just a psychopath obsessed with his dead granddaughter. Something to mention is that Gerald actually dies many years before the events of SA2. What does that mean, you might ask? A normal person, even if they go through the most traumatic events in life, is healed in some way over time, even if they carry wounds and traumas. What I'm trying to say is that Gerald didn't live that long after finishing his plans, which didn't give him time to rethink his actions and give up the idea of destroying the world. And that applies to the movie Gerald too. He's alive 50 years later and still wants revenge, even though he lives in a prison with almost nothing to do but think. The same thing doesn't apply to Shadow because he was in a stasis. But if we apply the scenario to Gerald in the games, with that much time, someday in those 50 years, he would make peace with humanity. Even if he never forgives Gunn for what they've done, he'd probably give up the idea of destroying the world. Letting Gerald alive was the worst decision this movie could make. Don't get me wrong, I know you might be thinking, but this is an adaptation. It doesn't have to be the same. But the big problem is that you see everything going in the opposite direction. When a child who has seen the movie goes to play Sonic X Shadow Generations or Sonic Adventure 2, they will be shocked because this movie is completely different from the main message that Gerald was created to convey. Gerald wasn't the real villain of SA2, so if you don't understand that, may you need to give it another chance and see it from a different perspective. Gerald was a scientist fighting for a good cause. He wanted to cure Maria and dedicate his life to accomplishing this task. Even when he made decisions such as allying himself with Black Doom, he had no desire to harm anyone. What would you do in his place? Would you let your loved one die and do nothing to change it? What Gerald did was wrong, but it's not that simple. Because what led him to decide to destroy the planet and all the people on it was a response to what he was going through. His anger, sadness, and despair led him to act in this way, and if you look at the whole story of SA2, it's a really tragic thing, because most of the things that happened weren't entirely his fault. Gerald wanted to cure Maria. Shadow was created to be the cure, and Maria was just living her life and was a lovely child. If we can summarize the main message of SA2, it would be a series of tragic events driven by human greed that led to wrong decisions and brought ruin to almost everyone involved. And then there's Sonic, trying to show us how we should live and learn, even when we can barely swallow our fears and pain. If you want to point to something that can be blamed for all this, you might come to the conclusion that it's Gunn's fault, who decided to close down the Ark and eliminated everyone involved. And if you look at it from that angle, you will understand most of Gerald's pain, his despair at seeing the person he loved most being shot, when she did nothing wrong and was still a child, when you're trying so hard to heal her and then she's just taken away from you. What must that feel like? Can you really judge Gerald? What do you do in his place? His plans to destroy the Earth were truly terrible, but this game is much deeper than that, as it has everything to make you see things from many different points of view, like Gerald, to see his suffering, to understand what lies beyond, what lies hidden below. My big problem with Gerald in this movie is that it is not just an adaptation, it's something opposite, something that is in essence offensive to the source material, not just in the way the character behaves or acts, but in its fundamental message. Even if we analyze characters like Knuckles or Tails, who are different from their personality and behavior in the games, the basic essence of each of them is still there. Knuckles is the last echidna. He has a sense of duty, determination, and responsibility towards his tribe and the Master Emerald. And he is, in a way, the essence of a warrior. And this is not altering the films, despite being an adaptation and having very different elements. The same goes for Tails. He's kind and friendly, but at the same time insecure and shy, and despite his genius, he remains a child. Being an adaptation is not an excuse. One thing I like it about this universe is Knuckles' backstory. Even though we see it very quickly, we can tell how the Echidna clan ended and how Knuckles ended up being the last. The essence of the Echidna tribe is preserved. Through the movie, we can assume that the whole tribe was involved in the final battle against the Owls, believing that they would succeed, and then they left Knuckles behind because he was too young. And during the battle, they all died, causing him to become the last. When you think that the main reason for the fall of the Echidnas is almost the same as the game's counterpart, it seems right. Even if it's adaptation, the Echidnas were seeking power, full of greed, and wanting to prevail over the other species, and the result was their extinction. But in Shadow's story, we don't have that. They're not just changing the basics, but the whole message. We don't need to see the space colony arc, the bio-lizard, or even Shadow's creation. The main aspects of the story are entirely emotional. We just need to see these elements applied and developed properly, even if it's done in a different way. I'm going to show you a hypothetical scenario about how this movie could have properly explored Shadow's past without the need to be faithful to the games. Imagine if Shadow fell on Earth, and meanwhile, Jared was presented as a brilliant scientist in the mid of 1970s, where there was no advanced technology available and who was looking for a cure for Maria. And when he's about to give up, Shadow appears, and then Jared sees him as the answer he was looking for, like a miracle that fell from the sky. Then Jared is shown interaction with Shadow, and a bond is formed between them. And we could keep almost the same scenes of Maria interacting with Shadow, just removing the part where she runs around on roller skates, and maybe the movie could adapt Maria to be in a wheelchair, to offer a perspective of children who have this condition. And then they could insert a dialogue where she says she wants to get healthy soon, so she can leave this military base and travel the world and see the beauties it has. She talks about the photos she sees of other countries, waterfalls, and monuments, and how she intends to bring Shadow on this world trip with her. Then Shadow has fun imagining Earth and wants to witness all the beauty she was talking about, all the creatures, big or small, that live on this planet, and how, even though he's an alien, a foreigner, he is welcome to experience it with her, and so Shadow would be connected to Earth itself, preserving the same message as SE2. And we could also have a moment when Maria collapses slightly because of her condition, which makes Shadow so afraid of losing her that he becomes emotional. And when he's being tested by the scientist, he caused the machines or the capsule in which he was trapped to explode without causing any deaths, just causing a lot of damage to the laboratory. It would then become clear to the scientists that this whole experiment is dangerous, and we would get statements from the government authorities that the experiment should end and Shadow should be arrested, and that would make clear why Jared and Maria are being persecuted in the first place. And this could evolve into a scene where we see them arguing with Gerald, and Jared not accepting this decision just when he was so close to discovering a cure for Maria. He could even talk to Walters at this point, and Walters could tell him to escape with Shadow and Maria from that place. And in the scene where they're running, they could have introduced something like Maria being left behind for some reason, like tripping on the way or something. And then when the soldiers catch up with her and try to shoot her, and Walters intervenes, the shot that explodes the capsule would have made sense in wouldn't only Maria and not Gerald and Shadow, correcting that problem, since in the original script they were both in the same room, but they didn't die or suffer serious damage like Maria, even though she wasn't sick or fragile in this movie. Therefore, things like these small details and developments would have been much more interesting and would add value to the movie's narrative, making it more consistent. Now that we've seen how things could have been different in this adaptation, let's focus on what we actually got. Shadow hasn't lost his memories, and that's a big problem. The main reason Shadow seeks revenge, apart from his internal pain and Jared's manipulation, is because he doesn't remember clearly what Maria wanted. If we look not only at the game, but also at adaptations such as Sonic X, we'll see that even when confronted about his desire for revenge, Shadow isn't shaken in the slightest. His resolution to destroy the Earth is almost absolute. No one could convince him otherwise. No one except Maria. The reason Shadow changed his mind wasn't because of external factors, but because he remembered what Maria wanted, what she means to him, and how the things he's doing now goes against what she always wanted. That's why he changes. Even if people try to argue that his change was too quick in the games too, that's not true, because his perception of what he's doing and what it all means has been explained correctly. I don't know if you had a moment in your life when you remember something, someone, maybe your parents or friends, or even what you heard somewhere, that made you rethink really important things about your life. As if it were something your grandfather told you when you were a child, and when you grow up, you have a moment of realization that changes your perspective on everything. It's something similar to what we see here in SE2. Shadow is going through a moment of realization, and that's what makes him change and decide to help Sonic save the world. It's something internal, essential, and deep within him. It's not something that someone says to him like, "Oh, revenge is bad, no one should do that." The deepest change begins inside, not outside. The desire for revenge is not something you can fix with brutal force. If they wanted Sonic to redeem Shadow, they could use another similar strategy, which would have much more impact on the story. And my suggestion would be this scenario. When Sonic beat Shadow, if Shadow had kept fighting, punching Sonic, like this scene in Captain America 2, where it would be shown that Shadow would actually be on the opposite side, this would make Shadow realize that he would be the cause of a tragedy similar to what happened to Maria, and Sonic would be right there, about to die at his hands. He could remember through the image of Sonic and also of Tom how he felt in those moments, and also through a few words from Sonic, who despite being beaten, said, "This is what you wanted?" That would trigger his memory of Maria, the high point for him to have a realization. When all external circumstances fail us, we obtain greater enlightenment from internal perceptions. And with that, Shadow will cry silently, just like in SA2 and Sonic X, and only after that, he and Sonic could talk and decide to save the planet together. The goal of the story would be achieved in the same way, but in a much deeper way. This scene where Shadow questions Gerald about Maria's true desire is strangely similar to the moment when Silver questions Blaze about sacrificing a person to save the world. But if we analyze it, this doesn't apply to Shadow, because for a person with such a deep pain and such a desire for revenge, seeing things from that point of view is practically impossible. It's similar to you implying that a person with depression is capable of healing himself and wondering why he isn't happy when life is so good. It just doesn't make sense. Silver begins to question himself precisely because he already has a strong sense of justice. The events only led him to rethink his actions. The act of questioning yourself is a proof that you care about what is right and wrong. But when you try to fit this logic into Shadow's story, it doesn't work, because Shadow's vision of what is right and wrong was already compromised. The use of the super form is treated as nothing more than a power boost in this movie. Throughout the story of the franchise, Sonic transforms into Super to protect his friends. This is demonstrated in the last movie, when Sonic managed to get the emerald, but he doesn't know how to use it yet. He reaches super form for the first time out of a desire to protect his friends and family. That's the essence of Super Sonic. I will illustrate this using the Ruby series as an example.
It is the desire to preserve life which fuels the light inside you. Preservation is an extension of creation, or, at the very least, an enemy of destruction. Don't think about your light as a means of destroying evil, but as a way to protect.
Super Sonic has always been motivated to be used to protect, not to destroy. So that's a very wrong way to use his super form. After all that, my only wish was to be able to reach the so-called final battle, in which the two of them would transform into Super and fight to the sound of Live and Learn. But even the ending, which was supposed to be a redemption for all the other problems in the movie, wasn't safe from excessive of comedy. Viewers are overwhelmed with anticlimactic scenes, where we have an epic battle between Sonic and Shadow to the sound of Live and Learn, but this is interrupted to set the stage for one of the most ridiculous fights I ever seen in a movie. I've probably lost a few years of my life watching that. The quality of these scenes is truly incredible, but unfortunately they only last for 3 minutes and are even interrupted at the climax, which make it even more disappointing. It's like the movie is saying that it knows what the fans want, but simply decides to ignore it and reduce it to just a 3-minute scene. Sonic is already a franchise for child, even its games, with only a few exceptions. There was no need to turn the story into something so simplified. What became clear to me during those incredible fight scenes between Sonic and Shadow is how much we're missing. Even if the movie itself is reasonably good, we could have had something much better. We could have had a greater focus on the characters of the franchise itself rather than the human characters. But the movie gives the feeling that the franchise isn't good on its own, that it's necessary to keep turning the attention away from the main characters and change the essence of things. What's the need for that? Sonic stories have always been made with dedication and with the intention of inspire thousands of people. Now, answer me honestly. Apart from the final fight, is most of the movie we watch really inspiring? The stories we love the most stand out because they have an emotional side, because they make important points. They pass on a message that we need to hear. Sonic 3 is like eating a sugar-based meal. It tastes delicious at the moment, but it hasn't filled nutrients, and soon you will be hungry again. Liking something doesn't mean you can't criticize it. It's because you really like it, you want it to be better. At the end of the day, we're just fans who love this franchise and want it to be treated properly. Thanks for watching.